Welcome to Navigate Now, the podcast where we discuss everything around people and places. I'm your host, Jon Docksey, and we're super excited to have Steve as the guest on today's episode. We're going to be talking about the impact of place management on wayfinding. Great to have you with us, Steve. Thank you for joining us on this episode. Super looking forward to this conversation to understand from your experience and also kind of in the wayfinding world. So just for our audience, it'd be great if you can give us a bit of an introduction. Who's Steve?
Sure, yeah. Well, I'm a professor of place management. I'm based at Manchester Metropolitan University. And over the last 5 years, I've been working as a high streets task force expert, which was on a big government programme to support placemaking skills and capacity building across 150 locations in England. So that's predominantly what I've been doing. When I'm not doing that, I'm mainly watching the football at Man City, where I've been a season ticket holder. Not just during the glory days, but when we were playing York and Gillingham in the third tier. So people can't criticise me for not being around for a long time on that score.
There's a few miles going back on your kind of work with the High Streets Task Force. There's a few miles you've covered there, then covering the UK on that project.
Oh yeah, Joe Barrett from the Teenage Market tried to estimate it on using AI or something, and yeah, I mean I could have gone to Hawaii and back or something like that. It's some ridiculous. They've gone to the moon.
And a few miles in following Man City around Europe as well. And do you manage to get to any of the away games?
No, not really. Yeah, too busy for that, maybe. But at every home game I'm at. So yeah.
Cool. No, it's really good to find out. And thanks as well again for joining us on this episode of Navigate Now. So super looking forward to understanding from your experience and obviously your work there recently, but also your education and your background at the university. It's going to be super exciting to get your insights into this particular topic we're going to look at today. So just as a first question then, what interests you about navigation and journeys as part of your work in place management?
Okay, well, I think there's a personal reason in a sense that well, I can drive, but I choose not to. And I'm kind of like, got some environmental reasons for that. And whilst I live on the edge of the Manchester city centre, I don't need a car. I walk everywhere. I use public transport. The odd journey I fill on Uber or other taxi provider. And part of that is, I think I look at my bank balance and think I'm several £100s better off without owning a car. So I kind of made that decision. And I noticed during lockdown, when there was virtually no cars on the road, well, I could hear birds sing in Manchester city centre and all the benefits of that in terms of air quality. So, but I'm not, I'm an advocate for kind of, not banning cars, but reducing our dependency on them and promoting alternative uses. So getting around cities is really important part of that. So that's my personal thing. I'll put my stall out. But practically on the there's a science behind that as well, in the sense that the work that we do through the university in supporting town and city centres underpinned by a lot of academic research. Some we've done ourselves, and some others, a lot of it other people have done. And we've attempted to build a decision-making framework to help places restore vitality and viability to their high streets. And walkability is up there as one of the top intervention points. So, but my message there would be, rather than arguing endlessly about where to put the car parking, actually there's more interesting things places could be focusing on. And one of them is improving walkability. That will have a better impact on promoting, more people to visit, and promote also people spending more money. So there's a logic to it. And when I say walkability, that's a bit of a catch-all term for a few things, really. Synergies, linked trips, connectivity, and the quality of that kind of pedestrian experience is all really important consideration. If places are generally interested in restoring their high streets, then that's a key factor.
Yeah, definitely. I think I saw a LinkedIn post And it was like, why do we grit the road network all the time in the UK when there's, well, we'll leave aside the public funding aspect of it, but why do we grit the road network all the way in the UK, but we don't have, local authorities don't have an approach to automatically, at the same time,
Sure.
grit the footpaths? And if we wanted to
And
encourage people,
interestingly, I was just out in Helsinki just quite recently, and they do grit the
yeah,
pavements. So it's not like it's impossible
yeah,
or unachievable. It's just a very practical consideration when it's cold that it might be sensible to create safer environments for people.
when you mentioned walkability, that's that dynamic of where do we put the car parks? What's the priority? What's the focus of our places? And to allow people to use those. One thing I want to pick up in a bit is like that multimodal modes of transport interchanging together. Because, like you say, even if we do use a car, we're going to we're going to walk some part of that route as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, part of that, the consideration is connectivity between what I might call arrival points and place-based anchors. So, so if you arrive, like I've arrived at one town, I won't say
Yeah,
where the railway station, you walk out the railway station into a car park, and it's cuts, and it's very difficult to then think, how do I safely get to the town centre? It discourages me from doing so, and it's if I arrive at the bus station, how do I get to the hospital without it's that clarity, which adds in, it's not just about commercial gains, it's about quality of life and making things easier. And it's okay me saying that as a able-bodied person who's able to walk, I do walking in the hills and so on. But if I'm wheeling somewhere, or if I'm crutches or something, that becomes an important consideration. A 5-minute journey is actually a much longer distance for some people, and we need to consider that as well in terms of inclusivity.
100%. We talk a lot on this podcast around that, and we've got various episodes where we've interviewed individuals with lived experience. I think that's really important to have that perspective of how people move around place. But you've got there, we've mentioned around the theory, the science behind these decisions. But I guess it's often, I think it's good to the human problem that we're solving as well. In that
Yeah.
sense, you mentioned a couple of situations. Are there any other challenges that you come across your path that you go, well, this is actually the real benefit. This is what we're looking to solve. We're bringing in all this thinking and this background information, and that's why we're doing it.
Yeah, the challenges are well understood. I just, we teach a postgraduate course in place leadership and management, and I decided to reintroduce onto that is it Appleyard's classic study, which shows that the busier and wider a road gets, the number of social connections a person has with their neighbours reduces quite logically. And it's the same with town centres as well. If you want to go from one side of the high street to the other, but can't because traffic is flowing at a great rate between those two sides, the opportunities to cross the road and say shop at multiple businesses is reduced. So that's kind of what we mean by linked trips and synergies. But part of that as well is it's around social isolation as well, that we're creating a lot of urban environments which have diminished opportunities for social face-to-face interaction. The street is predominantly where that happens, so we don't give it the kind of consideration we perhaps ought to. And then you see about these crises in, say, there's health services around, there's people feeling mental health issues because of social isolation. Well, we might not be in that such a state if we have more sociable cities. So
Yeah,
it's these things are connected to me. You see some good examples of late. Like I was over in Salisbury a few years ago, and they were deliberately putting older people's homes in the town centre, close to existing services, but with that kind of concern in the back of their minds. It's like, well, why should we isolate older people in communities distant from anywhere where they're difficult to visit? Let's put them closer to essential services and other facilities, and that might solve other issues.
yeah, definitely. I think that's what I was thinking about just there is like, where does it become like important in our world? And
Yeah.
we can come in as professionals into a space, can't we, and improve that to a greater or lesser magnitude in that sense. But I often think, like as you mentioned there, the human impact of the societal impact of where we're going in this industry in that sense. And I like your example there around kind of those care homes being where the services are, because that enriches their life and their well being, physically, mentally, and creates a market, if you're looking from a marketing point of view and an economic point of view, into that particular place. So it's where would what if we were ask you the question like, why is navigation important to our world? What would be a couple of things that come to mind?
Ooh, well, it's. I mean, I know there can be a delight in the apprehension of being lost, but that's not. We might go into a maze or a labyrinth for fun,
Yeah,
and choose to do that. But when you encounter that in your day to day life, the city should not be a maze. It should be easy to get from one point to another, to understand where you are in the context of other things. And I'm sure a lot of people listening to this podcast have experienced that, where they've arrived at a distant city, sometimes not an overseas city, sometimes a city in their own country with the same culture, but then it's unfathomable as to what you do next. I could countless times I've arrived in British towns, say at a bus station or a railway station, and then just walked out and think, where do I go now? How do I get to my hotel? Where are the shops? I need to go to the toilet. I need, for some people that's an very important consideration.
100.
These things should be absolutely crystal clear, and it's reflective, really, of we've not really thought it through too much. Most of the bus networks in Britain require you to have an intimate local knowledge of where all the streets are. They're not named after destinations or as things which people might otherwise recognise. So that, it's a very important thing in terms of, and you start to think about people with different life stages. Younger people might not be unfamiliar; they might live in the town but be unfamiliar with it.
Yeah, or parts.
Where they need to, safe spaces. Older people, we do talk about issues around Alzheimer's and dementia encroaching on people's quality of life. Research shows that clearer walking routes and walking routes are important, not just in terms of everyday navigation, but actually sometimes in the treatment of those those kind of illnesses. So these are things we need, I think, to be much more front and center when we think about planning urban environments.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. And that picks up on a couple of things you made, kind of the walking and the blend between how we navigate around a space. How do you think, kind of, from your experience, like the multimodal travel ensures seamless navigation? I'm thinking kind of like a couple of things around kind of behavioural change, even just ticketing. You mentioned buses.
Yes. Yeah.
I guess in London, they have the system organised by Transport for London, which is kind of a one citywide scheme, operator, organizer, umbrella, whatever you want to call it in that sense. But from your experience around the UK and in other places, do you see, you mentioned barriers, the road barrier, a river can be a barrier. Where have you seen good successes or good opportunities to ensure and encourage that multimodal journey?
Well, I mean, the go-to places are always Amsterdam and Copenhagen, but my personal favourite place for getting around is Berlin. It is absolutely seamless. You could arrive at the railway, at the airport, and there's a machine there that goes, you want a 2-day ticket, 1-day ticket, you pay your money, and it's then the confusion just ends. It's like, you use that one ticket on everything. It doesn't matter if it's a train, a bus, a tram, underground, overground. It is absolutely, that kind of seamless. And that means when I go to Berlin, I can go anywhere in that city, not just the tourist hotspots, but trying to get out around and other neighbourhoods. So that's always my example. I was sat in a bar once outside in Berlin and watched more trams go past in an hour than I did cars.
Brilliant.
It's that dreamlike, which seems like when I come back to the UK, it always just seems massively frustrating. Other than in London, where and this technology has been existing for to enable this to happen. It's not like some kind of new AI system.
Yeah.
The technology existed for decades. So it's always very frustrating when you go to other places and it's seamless and simple, as in Brussels, Budapest, Helsinki. In Vienna, it was fantastic. You arrive at the airport and there's a lady there with a machine. You don't even need to go to the machine. She will tell you, face to face what you need to do before you've even left the collected your baggage. Little things like that just make life so much sweeter, and you don't have to faff around. Makes your trip welcoming. It makes so all these could be not just for tourists, but for everyday people. It should be made easier. I'm from Greater Manchester, and and I know Andy Burnham has been doing great work in this space, but it's taken years to get, we're still not there with an integrated. It's very frustrating that you can go, you can go and use, I don't know, the bus for £2, but then you switch mode of transport and you've got to pay again. I used to have a train pass through work, so I would get unlimited travel on all the trains in Greater Manchester, but I couldn't go and see my brother in Prestwich because he's on the tram network, so I could go and see him, but I had to pay again.
Yeah.
I don't understand why that one ticket just wasn't for everything and just made
I'm
life
sure
easier. So, I'm interested in that. And maybe these kind of subscription models, which you're beginning to see, where you pay a flat rate as a resident, say £50 a month, and that gets you on everything. Just simple. Just making things easier. In the UK, it's so complicated. You have to get a passport ID out, and you have to. Why? I encourage people to use the system, make it easy, make it cheaper as well. It's undoubted. It's a bit frustrating.
What I love about kind of this world is it's not all about spending millions of pounds, tens of millions of dollars in that sense. It's those small connections or those athletes. I'm going back to the sporting background when we started. Footballers, athletes, always looking for that 1%.
Yes, that continual improvement. And that cuts across the ticketing, signage, and all the other things, the maps, and making it as clear. So you've got less of a reason to make an unnecessary journey in a car, or actually get in the bus or the tram or whatever hovercraft, whatever it is. It is actually the sensible option. I'm always intrigued. Luxembourg, for example, has free public transport for everyone. It's not some kind of communist socialist enclave. You can see the logics in if you made all public transport free from a philosophical position, what benefit that might have on society. Well, people could get to work more easily. People who are not in work could find work. People could access services more often, more frequently, whether that be private or public or whatever. The air quality would go up, congestion would go down, people's car taxes could be reduced. All these kind of things. It's not some sort of anarchist view on the world. It's like, a logic's given wider challenges like climate change and the need to reduce emissions and our energy consumption devoted to transport.
That's a nice segue into something else I was thinking about is how does the cultural, social, economic dynamic of a place mean that we need to tailor the interventions or the solutions or the navigation needs to a particular environment? Obviously, as we move around the world, as we move around our countries that we live in, the dynamics change and develop in that sense. Even when we're thinking about, say, a towns or a city space, or even different types of destinations, an airport is different to a football stadium, to a city centre. And take that same stadium and put it into Brazil or America or Asia or Africa, those dynamics will obviously there's principles that pervade all human movement.
Yeah.
But how have you seen kind of cultural, socio-economic dynamics shifting the conversation and the solutions?
I think there's some universals in there. Like for example, the sign to where the toilets are could be, you know, unless you've got some sort of strong cultural difference on that score, or there's, a sign for an aeroplane, has been. I can understand that universal language around signage, but I also recognise, the branding of the Paris metro,
Yeah,
the fonts add distinction to that place. I particularly love Lisbon streetcars. I miss Malta's old buses, even though they weren't that functional, to be honest. But I miss that kind of distinct experience. So it's always going to be a blend, isn't it? I mean, and you can get distinction other ways. London's red buses opposed to Manchester's yellow ones. You kind of, there are these kind of, distinctions, I suppose. But I suppose the serious thing on it, no, not this, not more serious, but another consideration is that, I mean, there was some research out in the States looking at, well, could we transform, American cities so that, according to the principles of new urbanism, which is always about density, walkable neighborhoods, and some places in the USA you could do that. Other cities, it's going to be impossible because they're just so sprawled. That densifying them is, they're so car dependent that even an everyday convenience like getting a pint of milk involves having to get in a car and drive several miles. So that's a concern, that we've ended up. That's not sustainable. I mean, no matter what your ideological perspectives is, people using all the energy and fuel to go and get a simple pint of milk is not a sustainable option. There has to be an alternative. So some, and the worry is, say in the UK, we find similar characteristics. Like, so, I live in the heart of Manchester, on the edge of the city centre. I can walk to work, walk to the shops. I can get to other cities quite easily because I can walk to the transport hubs and so on. But I also know in some suburban parts of the conurbation, we've got sprawling housing estates which are disconnected from infrastructure, where car dependency is I've seen of some neighbourhoods where the car dependency rate is higher than that of Los Angeles. That's in the UK.
yeah.
So you would worry about the, proposals for new housing development and, which don't have local facilities, which will reinforce or hard bake basically an unsustainable model of how people get around. And we seem to have a problem with density in the UK, and seems to be a common factor where you've got dense populations, that will sustain multimodal transport networks, ideally on a third model, where a third of the population are walking or wheeling to work, a third are using public transport, and only a third are using private transport. We just seem to be way off that in the UK. Maybe not so much in London, but certainly outside of the capital. And I think that's a challenge, really. It's a global challenge when you look at urban sprawl beyond the West as well. It's not just a Western issue.
Yeah, and I guess that's big picture stuff, isn't it, in that sense? Because can we retrofit that maybe in elements? But when we're thinking about that more master planning or wider strategy of place and of countries and regions, like you mentioned, Manchester and the Mayor of Manchester and the work they're doing in that sense, it's at that level where you can start to make those influences. Where do you see on a local level? Because one thing I'm really keen on in every episode is for the listeners of the podcast, so town centre managers, bid managers, regeneration teams, all those kind of professions that are based around place, to have a couple of takeaways that we can then take away to our places that we are, as I would say, custodians of, because we might not own them. So that's where I kind of use the word custodians.
Yeah, I like that. And Marcus and the great urban economist from the States kind of uses similar terminology, or place keeping, or place gardening, or place nurturing. I think these are much more useful terms in a sense. it captures that idea that place is never ending. You know, projects might come, be delivered, and be finished, but the place is still there and will continue afterwards. And that's very much my world of the everyday. And sometimes the less sexy parts of urban regeneration, which is about, well, who cleans the bins up, who fixes the uneven pavements, and all these other considerations, which operate at I suppose the posh term is the hyper-local level, and how that is managed and governed. We've still not, I don't think we've quite cracked it really in terms of that kind of neighborhood level or management. You know, it's interesting that bids operate in this space, but in the UK, there aren't that many really when you think about the number of town centres we've got, and with 300 bids or so, and 60 of them are in London. It's kind of, there's only 4 in Greater Manchester. You might be thinking, why isn't every major town and city centre got one? So it's, but these considerations for practitioners of place management, of which bid managers are one, and local government officers and so on, town teams, it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, the operational side of place, and how that plays a role in the vitality and viability of town centres. So how people get from A to B, contiguous urban, pedestrian experiences. We've been having that kind of debate in Manchester. We've done some work with some of the operators of privately owned public space around, minimum standards, guidance, sharing good practice. I'm quite intrigued by London's public charter for privately owned public space. The idea that if you, let's say you arrived in Manchester at, say, Piccadilly railway station, and you had to walk to a commercial district like Spinningfields, that should be a seamless, contiguous, and equally pleasurable experience, I suppose.
From a wayfinding perspective, if we have a privately owned public space in that sense, can we, as the local authority, sign you down that route? Is that a public right of way? So yes, all those kind of questions need to come up, don't they, in conversation? Because if you're the owner of that place, that privately owned public space, and you put a gate around that at some point, but the local authority has put a sign to say that's the route to Springfields, etc., and then that becomes that's where we need this conversation to happen, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's been clouded, that debate as well sometimes, in the sense that this is a privatisation or closing down of something. But I think it's the other way around. Michael Carmona's written about this as well. It's more around the publicisation of private space, and it's that. I think that's a more proactive way of looking at it, in a sense. Okay, well, there are certain things you can do in public space you can't necessarily do in privately owned public space, but that's not necessarily in the interest of the people who manage these spaces, who want also to see them, used, and because they've got assets to manage and profits to make.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, and I think it's because it's been recognised that if you've got active ground floor usage, and places where people want to dwell or linger, it doesn't really matter what the legal status is of that space. And obviously, there's things you can't do, like vandalism, but you can't do that anyway.
It's kind of, isn't it?
If you decide to go around punching every other stranger, it doesn't matter if that's public or private space. And so it's I think that's the history of that ultimately. The history of public space, it's evolved, it's developed, it's mutated. It's always been a lot fuzzier than a simple binary of public v private. It's much more complex than that.
Collaboration, isn't it? Like we said, we're all custodians or guardians or of place in that sense. So we're that collaborative approach. One thing I wanted to pick up as well is obviously the great work that you do at the university and the courses that you run in that sense around how we can improve the knowledge base around place. Where do you see, when you're delivering maybe courses and having chats with students, about where that place theory has a big impact on the implementation of projects? So where you're brought in to collaborate with an architect or an urban planner or someone who's doing a place project, where do you see that kind of collaborated between the professional services and obviously the background and the education, the science behind it? Where does that come from?
Yeah, I think it's important. I think the danger is, I don't think we do this. We don't come in with a prescriptive model. I think our job is to kind of say, look, here's some guidance. Here's what might work well. But ultimately, and we know what the challenges are. We also know pretty much what the solutions are. But how that might work in a particular place, it's not so easy just to say, well, it worked down the road, it should work here. That doesn't work either. So even though I say all these things, it's local solutions, local knowledge is ultimately the key to this. But absolutely, and it's not rocket science either. It's collaborative work, and it's like no one actor can do it by themselves. And I think a lot of the blockages are much less to do with intention, but much more about ways of working, the capacity or skill set to be a little bit more kind of involved in diplomacy, partnership building, trust, reciprocal working, all that kind of much more human. I'm trying not to use the word softer, but that kind of less technical skills and more people skills, I suppose, is where there's a bit of a gap. And I think you can probably, I think even the best planner or architects will recognise that yes, they can bring a lot to the table in terms of technical expertise, but not necessarily the skills to broker a relationship in what is often quite a contested space, because everyone's got an opinion 100%. About the town centre.
But if someone's listening to this episode and they want to reach out, what's the right way for them to approach you? Because they've got a project maybe that they're maybe not struggling with, but want some wider input on or to benefit.
Sure. Yeah, we're always happy to have a chat, obviously, about stuff. We work on a model of engaged scholarship, so we're not going to come to you with a solution. We're going to say, right, well, here's a toolkit. Go and play with it and see what you come up with, and then we'll kind of like review that. But I think there's other ways we can help with that as well, other than the toolkits and diagnostics that we've kind of built already, and we've road tested those to death now through the High Streets Task Force. So we kind of confident that it works as an approach. It's coming through our evaluation, and so if you speak to me in September this year, I'll have a lot more examples of of where we've encouraged a way of working or a change in mindset, or it's always useful for an outsider to come in and say, look, you're arguing about this, but I've noticed there's a burning mountain of tyres in the town centre. Maybe put that out first. Clear the litter up. There's youths in balaclavas going around on quad bikes, which I have seen. Yeah. So it's like just to say like a place branding exercise is going to solve that is actually there are more. There's a certain order of things that needs to be done, and that's where we can help with.
Definitely.
I suppose the stuff we're working on at the moment is we've done. It's more around. I don't know what's the way of saying this. Walking atmospheres.
Okay. Yes.
So that's the kind of like we're trying to apply some ideas from Jane Jacobs and Richard Sennett and others, but in the context of marketing theory, which is around place atmospherics and the idea that that places have a certain atmosphere to them, and you can enhance or reinforce that, or destroy it.
Actually, a quad bike scenario. Yeah, you can put a quad bike in the place.
So and that comes from a concern, and this would be my big takeaway. And this is what this is my more academic research. Is a concern that our public spaces, we've let them drift. We've not invested in them, and where we have invested, it's kind of created very bland environments. Strips of enchantment, quite functional corridors, but not places where people might want to dwell or linger. In fact, we actually, regulate against that, because with all crowds of youths hanging around, we better move them on quickly because they might cause trouble. It's kind of that kind of dilemma. So we've done a lot of work in a place where people might not assume to be an exemplar of public realm design, but in Blackpool, where where the regenerated civic, sea defences has afforded this opportunity to really rethink people's relationship between of the seafront and how they use it. Oh, and had if Blackpool's promenade was down the banks of the River Seine or along the banks of the River Hudson, we would be waxing lyrical about how brilliant this project. And in fact, it's in Blackpool. No one really talks about it. So if you go to Blackpool Promenade, they've created headlands that, through biomimicry to manage the storm defences, but created steps so people can engage with the water when the tide's in. But also, without much regulation, have created a space where people can walk, wheel, use a mobility scooter, hang around, have a picnic, or just sit on a deck chair. Without much, regulation, and it just works as a space. Tactile interventions, artistic interventions, a few uncanny elements to it, and really, quite playful in times. We just seem to be. I just think, oh, if this was in Manchester, I'd walk down it every day.
Like from that case study, then in effect, like, would there be one thing that you could say every place could consider or could think about?
Yeah. Well, in a simple word, let's have more fun with it.
Yeah, 100%. We can be too serious sometimes, can't we?
It's we look at various things: sound, light, material qualities of the space.
Yeah.
And all how this all can be used to enrich or make a space just more interesting, and that makes people's lives better, particularly if it's a space that people use every day of their lives.
Yeah, I think kind of wayfinding should be about storytelling as well, and that's part of branding as well, isn't it? And about communication. Because if I was to come to Manchester, or you were to come to, say, London, and I were to take you around, I would be telling you stories. I'll be taking you to a place where things happen, where I had memories, etc., etc. And if we can, that starts to go on the fun dial.
Yeah, and it's there's all sorts of opportunities. Even if you live in a town with no great attractions, or you can manufacture these things, and but you're reliant on local understandings of that space then, and those kind of locally generated scripts or narratives which would add distinction to that place. And everywhere's got that kind of history, and if you haven't got it, then make it up.
Sure. And that's a good point then to maybe think about as we kind of wrap this episode to a close in a few moments, is around, we've got all that legacy, we've got that story, we've got those places that we are currently have, but where do we see the future of navigation? People always, when they think about the future, default to technology, and I understand where they're going, but where would you see the future opportunities within navigation?
That's a big question.
100%.
I think the technology is interesting. I think we're at an interesting juncture point, and that's more than just kind of using the Google Maps or Apple Maps to find somewhere. Although that is tremendously useful device, I use it all the time. But kind of what's not really come through is this kind of AR VR thing, and I think that kind of points to a challenge and that's kind of what why I'm interested in walking atmospheres. It's the real experiences, is that's the quality, the along Blackpool Prom, it's the seagulls, but it's also the spray of the foam of the of the ocean coming over adds to everything which you can't really reproduce digitally or through. So but then again, I look at some of the opportunities through the digital technologies. For example, the choice, like a street, like a map which tells me, and point at my phone as if I know how to use it. But like, if I could walk down a street with poor air quality, and had a choice to go down a neighbouring street with better air quality, that kind of does exist already. And that we could actually start to, if a street is over, like the Google Maps will tell you if a road is congested. Well, could we have similar things that might help manage over tourism and by dispersing people, or it might be used in crowd safety applications. But I think there's a real opportunity around certainly the kind of the virtual reality solutions around working with older people who kind of immobile, or don't have these opportunities. Maybe that the opportunities to walk down La Ramblas could be brought to everyone without you having necessarily to go there, particularly if you can't afford or unable to. So I think it's a real juncture really where these things are coming together. But I don't like this crystal ball rolling gazing, because like whatever I say, the opposite will happen.
Sure, yeah. And I'm obviously conscious that people from listening to this podcast want some practical, deliverable things that they can are not pie in the sky and not kind of 20, 50-year visions in that sense. But yeah, like you say, there's nuggets around making places as accessible for everybody.
Yeah.
And it's
Just
really
getting the basics right. I
Yeah.
think is the focus on that really is so important to people's experience of place. And we all do it. It doesn't, like I say, the moment you leave your car and leave the car park, you become instantly a pedestrian. If you cycle into a town, you get off the bike and you become a pedestrian.
having that.
And I think we do a lot of learning to be done around that still, and I think the technology could help with that as well. Like we know where all the Boris bikes go, for example, and we can map that out. I think doing some mapping with local people, this data already exists, and how people, navigate, traverse routinely. I think the other thing to consideration is going back to the beginning here when I talked about my interest in football. What was interesting, we did a study a long time ago about when Man City relocated the stadium. And we're not so interested in what happened inside the stadium, but much more interested in what happened outside the stadium, in terms of I'm trying to not use the posh term, but the spatial narratives
Yeah.
and the temporal networks that people would use, or a football fan would just call it their match day routine.
Yeah.
And which pub they went to, who did they meet, the intersecting points, the nodal points, and all that. And we were quite kind of like surprised about how disruptive that was, even though they only moved 3 miles.
And we've got that coming up with one in the next, what we know, the 25-26 season with Everton. And the
Yes,
UK club.
it's I don't think it was really fully anticipated, because we did some research 5 years after that relocation, and fans hadn't really settled at all. And then we did some contract work research for Man City some 10 years after that, where we just asked the same questions, and it was still the same answers. People were not settled, so the club had been, interestingly, have done some of the recommendations, which is around reinforcing the walking route between the stadium and the city centre, particularly Piccadilly railway station, where a lot of fans will arrive. Reinforce that walking route with some very basic placemaking interventions, plus a parade, stationing of information points along the route to try and really encourage. Because it's not that far. People think it's like a miles away, and it's not. It's a 20-minute walk from the station.
Yeah. It's behavioural change as well, isn't it? Like you say, it doesn't have to be millions of pounds or
no. But I think it ought to have been much more thought about in the master plan. To be honest, and it wasn't. And I think trying to retrofit is quite difficult when you're trying to retrofit against tram lines, canals, 19th century canal infrastructure, ring roads, and so on. There ought to have been a big pedestrian boulevard straight from the city centre to the ground.
Would you, if you were commissioned by the red side of the city, would you accept that commission as a blue?
I always accept commissions.
Brilliant, 100%. Because if it's going to happen again, isn't it? Stadiums, not just football stadiums, relocating.
Yeah. And I think what you look at some of the smaller clubs in Britain where the tendency has been sell the old ground near the town centre to Tesco or another big grocery company, and buy and build a new ground near the motorway junction. And you look at these grounds and people's experience of them. People drive to them, they drive away. They're not as enriching places where you look at. We looked at the Millennium Stadium or the Principality Stadium in Cardiff, and when on rugby union matches, that transforms the city centre. both, before, during, and even the day after.
Yeah.
It drives an evening economy. It drives the morning economy. It's kind of like a kind of no-brainer. It's kind of like put your footfall anchors near station and existing shops, and so there's a lot of lessons to be learned through these kind of quite prosaic things, really.
So essentially, a couple of things we picked up then in this conversation. I'm super like there's loads of really insightful nuggets and experience there that we can take away from this episode. So thanks so much for sharing that time with us on the podcast. But it's around kind of that thinking beforehand, and which pervades kind of many points in life in that sense. But understanding all the user base and the impact of that, not just that's one thing I've taken out from there. You mentioned about say 10 years later with Manchester City Football Club. It's not just for tomorrow. It's for 5 years. Behavioural change is a big thing in how people learn and navigate spaces. Like you mentioned around Luxembourg, was it? Had no fees on their public transport. That must have been a radical shift. But what impact does that have positively in that sense? But other things negatively sometimes.
Sure.
Cool. No, brilliant. There's lots I'm sure that we can unpick further on other episodes.
Try editing all that down.
Yeah, definitely. So no, thanks very much, Steve, for joining us on this episode of the podcast. If people want to reach out and connect with you, where can they find you?
The easiest way is Google me at Manchester Metropolitan University or email me at s.millington@mmu.ac.uk, and also people can email the Institute of Place Management, and people want to join the Institute of Place Management, they're always quite welcome to do so.
Nice little plug at the end. That's really good. No, again, thanks very much for joining us on this episode, and it's been super insightful, and we're always looking forward to continuing that conversation.
Brilliant. Cheers. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Navigate Now. We've had a fantastic conversation with our guest this particular time, Steve, and we look forward to continuing that conversation in other episodes. Feel free to like, subscribe, so you can help us as we continue to learn together about everything around places and how people interact with them. I'm your host, Jon Docksey, and we look forward to having you on another episode.